Good morning. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be today's host. With us again, we have Jason Bartlett, who will re-explain a little bit of who he is and what brought him to where he is today for the folks that missed last night's show. And then we'll go from there and talk about some specific issues and compare and contrast him from the incumbent, Senator Mike McLaughlin, some votes and how he would have done differently, and we'll go from there. Thanks. Jason, first of all, briefly, who are you? What brought you to where you are? And who is Jason Bartlett?
Well, I'm a native of the area, lived here my whole life, graduate of UConn, and I served 2 terms in the state legislature as a state rep for Danbury, Bethel, and Reading. And just been nominated by the Democratic Party to take our banner into November and offer voters a choice in the 24th Senate District. I'm very proud of my record in terms of my advocacy for education, for jobs in the area. I got the original money for the film festival, the Danbury Film Festival, which is on its 5th year. We got state funds, and I introduced Carruthers to the mayor, and we got lobbied the mayor and the city council and got that off the ground. So I've been a big open space advocate. We did the Shriver property off of Putnam Park, and we increased about 180 acres into Bethel that was open space, and the former first selectman, who will be nameless, made me fairly famous in the area because I tried to get about 200 acres of Danbury land as designated as open space that Bethel happened to own, called Terre Haute. And you know, I'm excited to be in this race and excited to be here today.
Now, you mentioned that the 2nd State Assembly District was Bethel, portion to Danbury, and Reading. What does the 24th encompass, the 24th Senate District? Right.
It's the entire city of Danbury. I have probably a quarter of Bethel. The best way to describe it is the Stony Hill section. And I have all of New Fairfield and all of Sherman. So it's a challenge because it's a lot more people, but it's an exciting one because on day one, if I'm elected, I'll be one of 36. And you have a lot more power and a lot more clout and a better able to influence and have an impact on the lives of folks in this area by helping them as an advocate, as a state senator. So.
Okay, let's get right into some of the issues. What you mentioned in the first show, some of the things that you focused on, and again, just now you mentioned open space and advocacy for environmental issues. Spend some more time on education and tell us about some of the bills that you've been behind in the House, that you've introduced in the House, and what you presumably would be behind in the Senate, and how that, and compare and contrast that with Senator McLaughlin.
Well, my first bill was raising the age that kids could drop out of school. It used to be 16. My advocacy was for 18. We compromised at 17. So the whole notion of kids dropping out of school was something that I took on as my first bill. That passed. We also changed like when you could come back into the school. It used to be 3 days. So if you withdrew, you were out. It was very difficult to come back into the school. I made it over the course of two business weeks. So it's a 10-day window because I figured if a kid has a crisis, you know, you could talk to grandma, you could talk to a priest or a pastor, and, you know, somebody could get some common sense to allow the child to come back. So we changed that. We made more of a uniform withdrawal form and made it so that a guidance counselor or the principal actually had to sign so that there would be some counseling to students before they actually decide to withdraw from school.
So more pressure on the student to stay in school?
Well, yeah, more making sure that everybody is informed and why is this happening. You know, maybe the kid needs supportive services of some sort. You know, maybe there's something not being said. If it's a behavioral issue, you know, maybe, you know, ACEs or another place for the child to be schooled.
Alternative Center for Education,
Correct.
Yep.
So, you know, that's what I was trying to get to statewide in Greater Danbury, make sure that happened. And that bill passed. That was kind of my entree into the educational debate. And then from there, I started focusing on the achievement gap. I started focusing on failing schools. We have 3 failing schools in the city of Danbury. I started focusing on how do we make our systems deliver a better quality education. And I went around the state. I did forums and talked to teachers and principals, students, parents, and really, try to familiarize myself and talk and find out what were best practices and try to incorporate some of those into what needed to happen going forward. We did a helicopter bill that I basically wrote much of and worked with the teachers union, worked with CABE, and worked with fellow legislators.
Yes.
And my second bill encompassed a lot of different parts of education reform. Expanded online learning, for example. So I really think that that's going to be part of the future within the schools.
So what is that?
Well, you know how you could take, right now in higher ed, a lot more people are getting degrees online, and they have modules where you can be in the classroom by being in your computer.
Yes.
or watching a videotape of it. So we can't teach, Mandarin Chinese perhaps in the city of Danbury or in New Fairfield or Sherman because it costs a lot of money to bring that teacher in. But we could actually have a class for people who want to learn to speak Chinese or another foreign language, and the kids can do that. And so we need to embrace that. Or let's say you're failing algebra, and instead of repeating in terms of a whole year's worth of work because you failed a couple of courses, you could do an online remediation class to actually learn over the course of the summer or learn that second semester what you should have already learned. And so from tutorial aspect and also remediation, and also for those kids that excel, online becomes something that's cost efficient. It's like $400, for example, to take an online course from one of the colleges, versus if a kid had to repeat the following year, that costs the state $16,000 to repeat. Okay, we could do online remediation and do 2 or 3 classes, and that's a cost of $900 or $1,200. So that was something that needed to be flushed out and needed to be done. I worked on that. There are other aspects. I'm a big parent advocate. I believe that in order to have a good education, I grew up in Reading and went to Joe Barlow High School. So in the really good schools in Reading and Richfield, New Fairfield, Sherman, I'm sure, the parents are involved, the parents are engaged, and if a parent speaks up, a parent is listened to.
You're taking my question right away from me, because my next question to that would be, when it comes to in-school problems with kids having problems and being taken out of school for those problems, what part do the parents play in solving that problem?
Well, look, the parents' role is key. And what you find is in bigger school systems and in dysfunctional schools or systems, parents are either not a part of the equation, feel disassociated in some way, there's not true parent engagement. So in order to really get the best outcomes, parents have to be a part of the solution.
Sounds like shared responsibility between parents and student and teacher.
So one of the things, the way that I incorporated this actually into law, and that was the challenge, because we can sit here and culturally talk about a parent's role and all this kind of stuff, but as a legislator, how do we incorporate it? And what I wrote actually and came up with was a concept called school governance councils. And school governance councils, basically parents elect parents and teachers elect teachers, and they sit on a board that actually has statutory authority to manage a school. So there are things that they can do and things that they must do by law. And in every failing school in the state of Connecticut, they now have school governance councils. So there's 3 new school governance councils in Danbury, and there's over 200 and something across the state. And what the intention is that these school governance councils will learn like the data and learn all the different kinds of, like a Board of Ed person might, but in the school, and be a part of helping that principal actually manage the school. So they will theoretically bring more parents in because they're elected by parents or talking to parents. They will have access to that principal and to those administrators, and the teachers who often kind of know what's happening too in the school but don't always feel listened to are also a part of that council, and they're talking to the parents. So it's the only concept idea that's actually happening in the country. We're the first state that's we're the prodigy here. And part of what I want to do is make sure that this works. And that's a big part of what I see as real school reform. You know, we talk about teacher accountability, which I was for, again, as a freshman legislator 4 years before the governor and the teachers started fighting about that. I wanted to bring accountability in. This is a way to bring in parents and parental accountability and make sure that there's that dialogue and conversation. So there's a lot of different aspects to reform. Just off of what we were just talking about, accountability. Yes. I did disagree with the governor. I didn't think that we should, although I'm for teacher accountability, I didn't think that should be tied into tenure. When you pilot a program and then say, well, now we're going to attach it to tenure, I think that that's problematic. So, you know, again, I tried to be independent about education and education reform and try to think about what's best for the kids. So sometimes that makes me an ally of the teachers union, sometimes that makes me an ally of reformers. You know, there's a lot of issues out there in this particular area. And the one thing I know is that education is directly tied into the state of our economy, and it's tied into the future of the state. And we need to be spending more resources, and we need to be doing it more efficiently. We're going to have, or I believe we are having, an educational crisis in the city of Danbury now. That whole Head Start thing that was in the paper, and you know, how are we going to pay for education? That is the next issue. That is what's on our plate for next year and the year after. Do you have some
thoughts on how that's going to evolve and where what you'll add into that discussion?
Well, first of all, I'll be at the table, and that's important. Because I believe right now we're not getting our fair share in terms of education funding. Compare Danbury demographics to a Bristol, to a New Britain, to a Meriden. We're not getting our fair share. So number one, I'm going to make sure and look out for the taxpayer. Because this is the way that we finance education in the first place. It's all property taxes, is very unfair, especially to a city like Danbury. So I'm going to be at the table, and that's more than I can say for the current incumbent. The second thing is, I do think that the system is broke and it needs to be fixed. I don't have a particular formula that I've written per se, but I do think that money has to follow the child. I do think that in the city of Danbury there needs to be more choices. I think the middle schools are overpopulated. The high school is too big. And I think that in terms of capital monies, that monies have to be available to a city like Danbury and to this entire area so that there's more choices for parents.
And as a realtor, that's something that's my 25 years, that's been a constant, that the Danbury High School is too big, that it, in fact, there needs to be, in fact, in Danbury High School, they have 4 assistant principals, and the problem that evolves out of that is that the children that don't need to have that opportunity to fall through the cracks, as there's probably no adult in that entire high school that knows every single child. Those kids that you least want to have the ability to fall through the cracks have that ability because there are so many under one roof.
Yeah, I mean, I think Education Reform 101 says you can't have more than 1,000 kids in a building and expect to get the kinds of results that you desire. And it's just, so when you're headed towards 3,000 kids in a building, within an urban or more urban setting, it's not completely urban in Danbury, but you have a bunch of different languages, different races, different demographics. It's a college. It's just too much to manage. I like the idea of their different academies that they have, and I think that that's a good best practice. But the building itself and the number of kids in Danbury High School is too large, and so, as a senator, my responsibility is to figure out how do I advocate for the city in Hartford and help this city in terms of dealing with that problem and come up with some solutions. And that's where I think, having really gotten my hands in this issue and being a part of the solution statewide and in other areas of education, this is where I can have a major impact. Now, I contrast that with the current senator. He's done nothing in the area of education. He has not been an advocate. And the best example of that was the fact that he voted against the education reform bill that just came out of the legislature. It passed the House of Representatives unanimously. Unanimously. Everybody agreed. Republicans, Democrats, the teachers' unions were on board, the governor was on board. Everybody agreed. In the Senate, it was also bipartisan. The great majority of the Republican senators joined the Democrats and voted for the bill. But again, Senator McLaughlin didn't vote for it. And he basically said, well, I don't agree with the process. Well, what about the monies that were coming back to Danbury that he was saying, no, we don't need that money. We have a budget deficit to fill in the city. We definitely needed the money, and we definitely needed the reforms. And he had the entire session to inform himself, to raise his voice, to advocate for the kids of the community.
Or to propose alternatives.
Correct. And he did nothing. So he's silent on that issue, and I think that the city has suffered over the course of time, not having a senator who's looking out for education funding and trying to bring monies back for education in this city. We're now headed into a crisis financially, and I think he's shares much of the blame for that.
We touched on the birther bill in the first show. Let's go over some of the other issues where you would compare and contrast your vote with Senator McLaughlin, how you would vote differently than he's voted.
Well, he's on GAE, which is the government
accountability.
Yeah, and they deal with all of the election laws and things like that. And one of the things that I think is a huge difference is I think he basically promotes voter suppression. I think he's been a part of the national movement to make it more difficult for people to vote. Now if you go to vote and you don't have your license, you show a utility bill or some sort of bill, and or you sign an affidavit and saying that you live in Danbury or Bethel or New Fairfield. And he has consistently proposed legislation to make it more difficult for folks to vote. I would have been for, and I'm proud that the legislature finally got to same-day registration. That's something that he opposes. Time and time again, he's opposed efforts to open up the process and to make it easier for folks to cast their vote. And I think that, again, it speaks to a huge difference in terms of values and philosophy and approach. He doesn't want people to participate. I want people to participate. I think it's very important for people to register their vote. And you know what? People are working. People are catching the train. They're going into White Plains or Stanford or New York City. They're getting home late. They have single parents. People are elderly. They're very proud that they want to cast their ballot, but they wake up and they don't feel good. So maybe we should have voting over more than just the one day and have no excuse absentee voting so that people can cast their votes in the mail. It's happening all over the country. But Senator McLaughlin uses his influence and his power to stop all these kinds of progressive ideas and to keep the system arduous and cumbersome. And I think that speaks to his approach and his philosophy. So I look at, the birther bill, I look at that. I look at, for example, the Castle Doctrine.
Which is?
The Castle Doctrine, which we have, which a lot of people don't know, in the state of Connecticut. We are a Castle Doctrine state. What it says is if somebody comes into your home on a home invasion or something like that, you
have the right to defend yourself.
You can shoot them. And you do not have to, like, flee. You do not have to hide in your bedroom while they're there. You can defend yourself in your home. That's what the Castle Doctrine. You have a right to defend your castle.
Which seems reasonable, I think, to most people.
Yes, and I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is the Florida law, which is the stand your ground law and shoot first and ask questions later, and expanding that throughout your community so that it's not just in the home, but it's throughout your community. And that's exactly what Senator McLaughlin proposed and stands by, that he wants to expand the Castle Doctrine so that it's more reflective of Florida. And I think that's dangerous. And again, I think that's extremist. And, I wrote a column on the Castle Doctrine and the Stand Your Ground and Senator McLaughlin's position soon after the Trayvon incident in Florida. And he said that's,
Which is certainly a tragedy because when someone dies unnecessarily and very
that could have
unclear
been me,
situation.
my kids.
Yeah, could have been anybody's kid.
And that's not the kind of approach I think that we should be bringing to the law. And there's just a huge difference in that particular piece. We get into women's issues. I'm for trying to make healthcare as universal as possible. I'm all about trying to control costs. Senator McLaughlin has taken a very narrow view. I don't believe that he's ever tried to make our healthcare system more universal, that he's spent any time trying to control costs. But he has spent a lot of time attacking Obamacare and trying to he wrote a column recently that said that small businesses and businesses should not have to offer contraceptives to women, that should not be, for religious reasons, that should not be part of what we do going forward.
Even though those by the laws of the United States of America are all legitimate and legal.
Yeah, but he doesn't think you have a right to contraceptives. I have a problem with that. I have a problem to his whole approach to women's health care. I think he's taking a very narrow, extremist, view and approach to it. And I don't think that you should be able to hide behind, your religious views and affect the greater populace and say, no, women, you have to go pay for that yourself. If somebody wants to discriminate in that way and not offer you, that's the way it should be. I have a real problem with that. I think most women have a real problem with that. And then he's taken it a step further and said that he's for ultrasounds for women who have to have an abortion.
Is that the invasive ultrasound bill that was introduced in Virginia?
In Virginia, right. Yeah. And so he's, again, he takes these really extremist bills that are occurring in other parts of the country, and he's submitting them as legislation here in the state. And, I don't know if people know that that's what he's spending his time on. Not on jobs, not on education, not on healthcare issues that are germane to our daily lives. He sees that Virginia has an ultrasound bill and that's informed consent. And, when I called him on it just the other day, he said, well, I got that idea from the Knights of Columbus. And the Knights of Columbus, which I will, over the course of the campaign, show you that is not true, that the ultrasound does not affect the abortion rate in this country. And that's already been disproven. But, he's going to look to the Knights of Columbus for medical advice and medical facts, and that's where he's going to, that's what informs him in terms of legislation. And I think the Knights of Columbus are a wonderful group. I think they do great things, but I don't think that I would look to the Knights of Columbus on a medical procedure in terms of informing my vote and the way I write legislation.
Now, I read recently about a group called ALEC, which is a legislative something, which had
Exchange Council.
Exchange Council, which as I understand, Senator McLaughlin's very close to. They take legislators on paid vacations, getaways, and work with them to write these types of bills. Bills like the Florida bill that allows folks to literally chase someone down that they're afraid of, to follow them and shoot them if they have a claim to be afraid of their situation, afraid of that other person. They have the right to shoot that other person, which is behind the tragedy in Florida. But tell the audience about ALEC.
Well, it's a right-wing think tank type of group. Their primary mission is to get anti-union legislation. That's their number one thing. And then on top of that, they started getting into these different social issues. The Castle Doctrine and expansion of the Castle Doctrine and voter suppression were the two biggies, which happen to be exactly what McLaughlin has been putting forward in terms of Connecticut. And yeah, Mike took these free trips and basically is taking many of their ideas, or if not all of their ideas, and they write his legislation. So, you know, when I'm running, you know, some of my best legislation, my Lyme disease legislation, actually came from constituents in the district.
So local folks had more
Local folks approached me because Lyme disease, for example, is endemic in Reading and Bethel and Danbury, and they had personal, you know, circumstances and different situations, and we sat down and educated each other. I did research and tried to come up with a solution. Nobody had to pay me to fly to, you know, Louisiana to New Orleans for you know, some vacation trip and hand me, you know, these radical ideas from around the country and say, well, now we want you to go back into the Connecticut legislature and introduce those. And that's just a real difference, I think. I'm not looking to be, you know, anybody's, you know, person, you know, and to take these kind of wild ideas that somebody's paid for my trip and submit them as legislation. I'm interested in coming on shows like this and hearing from you and doing forums and going door to door and becoming informed by what's really happening in people's daily life. And I think that that's just a huge difference. And again, when we get into what's germane to our, what's important to our everyday life,
we're going to have to cut it off right there because we're out of time.
Okay.
But thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Jason, and we'll go from there, and hoping to have State Senator McLaughlin on too to discuss the issues.
Okay.
Okay. Enjoy your day.